The latest. Thank you for your love and support. A brand new city in Burkina Faso. Our all in all, our savior protector, the unifier, the most loved, Captain Ibrahim Traore, is building a brand new city in Burkina Faso. The West have always painted Africa poor. Africa do not have that. African cannot do this. But in actual sense, these people are the hindrance to our progress. They try to make sure that where we are, we never rise up by giving us leaders that cannot help us to progress. Now that we have found a very unique and a true son of the soil, we are seeing changes that is shocking the West themselves. Burkina Faso, as these people projected it as a poorest nation, that they are the ones giving us aid, and the Burkinabes are surviving, and all Africans are surviving because of the aid that they give to us. The true leaders are showing them the difference. Something that they have never imagined is about to happen in Burkina Faso. This city is an amazing, beautiful, and wonderful. The West have to now understand that coming to exploit us, taking the natural resources that we have, is what is making us poor. It's what is making us not to develop. If we don't control the natural resources that will generate the revenue for us to develop, how do we develop? You come into Africa, take everything that belongs to Africa, then turn back and point fingers at us and tell us how poor we are. What an amazing people that we are dealing with. They are doing all these amazing and wonderful things without World Bank, without IMF. We have all that it takes to manage our affairs, to change the fate and the narrative in Africa. That's the latest around the world. In Africa, West Africa, and in Burkina Faso.
Under the resolute leadership of President Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso is not merely planning a city. It is signaling the end of Western dominance and the rise of African sovereignty. The Renaissance city is more than just bricks and mortar. It is a revolution, a giant middle finger to the West, a declaration that Africa doesn't need foreign aid, approval, or influence. Africa will build its future, and the West can do nothing.
No one can blame Africans for assuming that the rest of the world has very little interest in their continent, except maybe for extracting natural resources like gold and oil, or buying weapons and counterterrorism. Former U.S. President George W. Bush famously referred to it as a nation instead of a continent with 54 very diverse countries, each with its own unique interests and history. President Trump had awful things to say about Africa.
For too long, the West has profited from Africa's resources, labor, and ingenuity, all while spreading false narratives of saving the continent. But those days are numbered. As the Renaissance City project takes shape in Burkina Faso, it stands as a beacon of African ambition and defiance. The message is clear. Africa will no longer be chained by neo-colonialism. While the West falters under the weight of its greed and hypocrisy, Africa is poised to take its rightful place at the helm of global power. But before you understand how important this city will be, you need to know how hard it was to make the Western dominance fall in Africa. The West, for centuries, has built its wealth by leeching off the riches of Africa. Colonialism, followed by neo-colonialism, has been the modus operandi through which they've maintained control over the global South, particularly Africa. But the world is changing, and the Western Empire is crumbling from within. Political instability is rampant in Europe and the United States, with corrupt leaders, divisive politics, and economic crises becoming the norm. Societies that once held themselves as the pinnacle of civilization are unraveling in real time. Brexit, for example, has left the United Kingdom weaker than ever, and the political circus in the United States has exposed deep-rooted systemic problems. In contrast, Africa is waking up, shedding the remnants of colonial shackles. Leaders like Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso are at the forefront of this awakening, driving their nations toward true independence. The Renaissance City project is more than just an ambitious housing plan. It's a declaration that Africa will not be held back by the dying powers of the West. As the West's house of cards continues to collapse, Burkina Faso is constructing the foundation for Africa's future, a future free from Western exploitation. The truth is glaring. The West's reliance on centuries-old exploitation models is no longer sustainable. The era of taking from Africa without consequence is over. The West is now grappling with its issues: failing economies, rampant social injustice, and a crumbling political framework. In their desperation to maintain control, Western powers attempt to destabilize rising African nations with economic manipulation and political interference. But the tide is turning, and Africa is pushing back harder than ever before. But how come the progress of Africa means the fall of the West in Africa? Was this not West's intention? They always said they want to make Africa better. So if Africa is becoming better, how is it affecting the West badly? While the West is caught in a downward spiral of economic decline, political chaos, and social unrest, Africa is rising, not with handouts, but with vision and determination. The Renaissance City project stands as an example of Africa's renewed strength. It is more than just homes or infrastructure. It is a symbol of defiance against the West's long-held belief that Africa cannot thrive without its interference. Africa is building its future with its own hands, its capital, and its strategies. And Burkina Faso is leading the charge. The 50,000 homes that Traore has promised are just the beginning of a much larger movement sweeping across the continent. The days of Africa begging at the table of global powers for scraps are over. We are witnessing the dawn of a new era where African nations are taking their destinies into their own hands. Compare this to the West, where once mighty economies now teeter on the brink of collapse. The United States, for example, is grappling with unprecedented levels of national debt, inflation, and an increasingly fragile political system that is losing legitimacy by the day. Europe, with its deeply fractured union, has no answer to the economic and political crises it faces. Meanwhile, African nations, led by visionaries like Traore, are laying down the blueprint for a future where Africa doesn't just survive, it thrives. The Renaissance City project, in particular, is a game changer. By rejecting the outdated Western playbook of dependence and exploitation, Traore is demonstrating that Burkina Faso, and indeed Africa, can build its future. The West is crumbling under the weight of its greed, while Africa is rising from the ashes of colonial oppression. It's important to remember that the West has long used housing and infrastructure development as tools for control. For decades, African nations were lured into so-called development projects funded by foreign investors and global financial institutions such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. These projects were nothing more than debt traps, designed to keep African nations beholden to Western interests. But Traore's vision for Burkina Faso breaks this cycle. The 50,000 homes planned for Renaissance City are not simply a cosmetic solution to the housing crisis. They are a foundation for genuine economic empowerment. These homes are being built with local labor, using locally sourced materials, and funded by African capital. This is how Africa wins, not by depending on Western money or falling into the same debt traps that have crippled so many nations, but by taking full control of its development. What makes the Renaissance City even more revolutionary is that it isn't just about housing. It's about reclaiming sovereignty. It's about showing the world that Africa can and will build its cities without relying on foreign aid or loans that come with strings attached. This is Africa proving that it can stand tall on its own, and the West cannot stand it. The housing projects of the past, funded by foreign aid or through international development agencies, have often resulted in more problems than solutions. For every house built, there's usually a hidden agenda. Often they come with conditions that strip nations of their sovereignty, placing them under the influence of foreign investors or global institutions. And who benefits? The elites in the West, while African nations are left with mountains of debt and very little in return. The Renaissance City, on the other hand, is Africa taking its power back. This project is a break from the old playbook. It isn't about appeasing foreign investors or winning approval from Western powers. Instead, it's about Burkina Faso asserting itself as a leader in a new Africa. It's about homes built by Africans, for Africans. It's about ensuring that the wealth generated from these projects stays in Africa and is used to uplift its people. Now the question is, how will the West cope with this?
The perceptions of Africa and the US are very much outdated, and I would say that they are stuck in the 20th century for the most part. You find this across various levels of American society. So overall, Africa is seen as a humanitarian case racked by conflict, by corruption, by terrorism, and in need of aid.